So, I guess for the record, we ought to begin by stating why we're doing this. And as I recall, some months ago, maybe a year ago, in a conversation we were having at your home, it occurred to me that you had a very interesting life and a very useful life, especially with regard to civil rights in this part of the country. And I thought it ought to be recorded for uh, your children, grandchildren, and posterity in general. So I suggested that to you, and you said you'd think it over. And then last June, when Nettie was getting the retirement party going, you told me that you had thought it over and you thought it, and talked it over with David at that time, and thought it would be a good idea. So we have gotten together a couple of times prior to this time, working out what we would do, and now we're here. I hope to a complete drawdown. And before I finish it, it should be clear that the copyright for this belongs to you, and this is not a professional production, but an attempt to record in I think an interesting way. Some of the very interesting aspects of your life. So that's why we're here. Now, what brought you to Atlanta? We probably ought to have a little bit of background of your life before you came to Atlanta and why you came there.
Well, I married Eleanor in July of 1952, and I was admitted to the New York bar later that year.
Now, you married her in New York.
No, we married here at the Temple in Atlanta.
Wow. Did you meet here?
No, we met in New York while she was an editor for the Macmillan Publishing Company, and I was at Columbia Law School. And we started dating, I guess, in my second year, and we married after my third year in law school. And we married after I took the bar exam, and we moved to Atlanta shortly after I was admitted to the New York bar. Her oldest father was Herman Hyman, who was a senior partner in the Atlanta law firm of Hyman, Abram, and Young. And Herman made me an offer I couldn't refuse. It was an offer to come and work for the firm as an associate, which I accepted. And of course, in retrospect, I'm very glad that I did, because I think Atlanta turned out to be a better place to raise the children than New York would have been.
So this was in what, 53?
We moved to Atlanta at the very end of 52, just so that I could be here before the turn of the new year and establish 18-month residence to qualify to take the Georgia bar, which I subsequently took in 1954 and of course passed.
And you worked then, your bow was?
I worked as an associate for about 5 years at Hyman, Abram, and Young, before leaving to go to work as the area director for the American Jewish Committee.
Uh-huh. Okay. And what were your tasks generally with the AJC?
Well, the American Jewish Committee, American Jewish Committee was a human relations organization, and in addition to institutional tasks like building membership and helping to raise funds and hold functions, we also were promoting better community relations and better human relations and harmony among various racial, religious, and ethnic groups.
Is this how you became involved with school desegregation?
Yes, that's how I became involved with school desegregation. There were a group of, I guess you'd say, white liberals in Atlanta who decided they better take action to preserve the public school system in Georgia when it became apparent that the federal courts were moving toward requiring desegregation. Earlier, there had been, in Georgia as in other southern states, what we called a massive resistance campaign. And in Georgia, the massive resistance campaign was led by Governor Herman Talmadge, Governor Marvin, Griffin, and their whole political crowd, which really controlled Georgia politics. And pursuant to the massive resistance campaign, they established legislation, adopted legislation rather, that would close the public schools if the federal courts ordered them integrated, or at the very least would cut off state funding for public schools. So basically, they said we would rather destroy public education in Georgia than end the dual school systems.
Now, this started in the late 50s or
Yes, this started after the U.S. Supreme Court decided Brown versus Board of Education in 1954,
right.
which Supreme Court mandated orderly desegregation, and the process was a slow one, but it finally moved into Georgia and to final court orders in the late 1950s. At any rate, the white liberals started a campaign to save the public school system. There were two groups. First, there was SOS, Save Our Schools, and then there was HOPE, Help Our Public Education. I think I had that in the right order. That SOS was first, but at any rate, the segregationists really completely controlled not only the political machinery in Georgia, but dominated public opinion as well. And there was a need to begin educating the public on why we had to have a public school system in Georgia. And so the focus was not integration. The focus was preserving public education. Because we weren't arguing the integration question. The truth of the matter is the integration question was not up for grabs. It had been decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. You cannot have a dual public school system with one school system for white children and another school system for African American children. That had been established as the constitutional norm. So we began trying to educate the public and trying to stimulate people to come out and speak in favor of keeping public education. At first, and for a long time, the business community was reluctant to get involved. Not that the business community didn't fully understand that if massive resistance succeeded in destroying the public school system, that would be a disaster for the economy of the state. Business leaders fully understood that. They probably knew it better than most. But there was a certain fear of taking on the political establishment because as powerful as the business interests were in Georgia, and still are, they were fearful of what the political establishment could do to them with their control of the legislature, the governorship, and the courts. And they were reluctant to pay the price.
This was a time when a rural vote counted more than an urban vote.
Yeah. We still had the county unit system in Georgia, and that's another story, which I can come back to and we can talk about later. The law firm Herman, Abram and Young took the lead in bringing down the county unit system, which devalued the votes of urban residents and gave complete political control to the rural areas. Abram was the lead counsel in that, but Herman, of course, did a lot of work on it. At any rate, to come back to school desegregation, shortly after moving to Atlanta and entering the law firm, I joined the Atlanta Junior Chamber of Commerce, which is generally referred to as the Atlanta Jaycees, as a way of meeting other young men who were in business in the professions and giving me an avenue to participate in civic affairs. And since I thought that it was very important to begin involving the business community in the effort to maintain the public school system, I thought the Atlanta Jaycees were a good place to start. And it was a place where I was already on the board, where I had contacts and a modicum of influence. So I prepared a plan of action for the Atlanta Jaycees to get involved in school desegregation. And I brought it to the board of the Jaycees, and the Jaycees adopted it.
What, was there no opposition to it?
Oh, there was indeed opposition to it. And one of the opponents on the board suggested that I was motivated by my employment by a communist front organization. He thought, erroneously of course, that the American Jewish Committee was on the Attorney General's list of subversive organization, which of course it was not. But he had confused it, I guess, with some other Jewish group. He was a worker stockbrokerage firm, and he was close to the Marvin Griffin administration. And he was the one who convinced that inspired the state government to begin examining my tax returns, which they did, and as, in my opinion, a method for intimidating me to get out of the school desegregation fight. Now, eventually, after the thing was over, after the fight was over, we settled the income tax issue with the state assessing me something like $23 for income earned in 1 year where I had worked partially in Georgia, but mostly in Ohio. And they waived, by this time they waived interest and penalties. But it was just a middle of frivolous. Well, it wasn't entirely frivolous because they hoped to scare me and that I would back off and send a warning to me and to others. You know, we've got some weapons to use against you outside agitators. At any rate, the Jaycees did adopt that plan, and they became the first business-related group to come out publicly in support of keeping public schools. And I think that had an impact that had an impact on public opinion in Georgia.
I'm sure it must be. Now, the junior implies perhaps younger.
Yes, members of the Junior Chamber of Commerce, the Jaycees, were no more than 35 years of age. They're generally between the ages of 21 and 35. But many of them were employees, were young executives of major Atlanta-based corporations, like Southern Bell, Georgia Power, Retail Credit, Coca-Cola, and so forth. And I think people pretty much understood that and the banks, of course, as well as the public utilities and some others. I think a lot of people in Atlanta understood that if those major corporations had given the green light to their junior executives, this wouldn't have happened.
Right.
So it was a way of testing big business to test the waters by having the younger executives get into the water first. And subsequently, Governor, I guess it was Governor Vandiver, appointed a Sibley Commission headed by John Sibley of the Trust Company of Georgia, which is now SunTrust, and King and Spalding, the law firm of King and Spalding, to chair a commission to go around the state and to hold hearings in each of the congressional districts and take testimony as to what should be done when the federal court issued a final order, desegregate. And as a result of the Sibley Commission recommendations, that made it possible for the state government to back away from its massive resistance stance and enable the public schools to go ahead with compliance with federal court orders. Nobody was volunteering to desegregate, but when the order came, there would be compliance.
And the order came in final, what, in 64?
No, in about 58, 59, somewhere around there. The late 1950s for the Atlanta public school system.
Okay, all right. What, there was something called the Mays Compromise. Do you remember that? That's something we haven't discussed before.
No, I don't recall.
Okay, no, that's probably alone. What about King at that time?
Well, no. Once we had, let me talk about one other stage in the preparation for desegregation. Once we had gotten past the point where we knew the school will in fact go to desegregate, I thought it was important to begin preparing the school system, or for the school system to do some preparation itself to handle integrated classroom situations, which it had never done before. And so I set up a meeting with the then Atlanta Public School Superintendent, Dr. John Letson. And I brought in Max Birnbaum, who was the head of the education department at AJC nationally. And I recall that the then Vice Mayor, Sam Russell, was at the meeting, along with John Franklin, who was, I think at that point, either the AJC chapter chairman or the immediate past chapter chairman. And we must have met all day long. John Letson said we're going to do this from the top down, that is beginning with the 12th grade and advances one grade a year. I had thought it would have been better to do it from the bottom up. Easier to do it with first graders than with 12th graders. But the decision had been made to do it from the top down. And to do several schools initially. It was decided, and we talked about it at this meeting, to pick one school from each quadrant of the city, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. Since none of the teachers had any experience teaching in classroom with mixed race, we agreed that one teacher from each of the 4 schools that were going to begin desegregation would go up to Boston University the next summer, where Max Birnbaum gave a seminar on human relations and education. And they would take Max's seminar, and Max would work with them individually to help them in answering questions and what they will encounter, what they might encounter, and how they should deal with problems. And then when they returned to Atlanta after their summer seminar, they would each talk to the faculty of their own schools and share with their faculty members the insights they had gained on how to deal with problems that might arise in the course of school desegregation. Now, DeJean Franklin and his wife Phoebe, and Dr. Bobbert Bunnan and his wife Lucinda were among the trustees of something called the Norman Fund, although it might have been the Norman Foundation, which had originally been funded by Rosenwald money. And as you may know, the Rosenwald family was exceedingly generous in supporting education in the South, particularly for blacks. So the Norman Fund agreed to put up the money to send these 4 Atlanta school teachers to Boston University for the summer section. But it had to be camouflaged. And I don't remember exactly how we did it, but I managed to get a check to Dr. Letson to pay for the expenses of the teachers and the tuition and so forth, without any identification either with the American Jewish Committee or the Norman Fund. I would say here that, and this may sound like a digression, but it's not really a digression. The Jewish community in the South was small and felt very vulnerable. And one of the attacks being made on school desegregation was that it was part of a communist Jewish conspiracy to Mongolize the races. In fact, that's what the people who bombed the temple were saying or believed.
Now, when was the temple bombed?
The temple was bombed, I think, in October of 1958.
Yeah.
And so the Jewish community was afraid of any public identification with the school desegregation effort because it might encourage anti-Semitism and attacks on Jewish institutions. In fact, there were repeated attacks on Jewish institutions throughout the South in this period, the late 50s and 1960s.
You know, McCarthyism, like I imagine, took hold here and lasted for quite a long time after it wasn't as influential in other parts of the country.
Well, I mean, insofar as it was focused on race relations.
Yeah.
Now, in fact, just shortly before I joined the American Jewish Committee, there had been an incipient revolt of Southern Jews who were threatening to withdraw from the American Jewish Committee and the Anti-Defamation League. They had become irate over the fact that not only that those two organizations had filed amicus briefs in the United States Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education, but that the Southern Jewish leadership was surprised. In other words, they didn't know it was happening until they read about it in papers. And they blew their stack.
A lot of them members, I guess, were very much minorities in small towns.
Exactly. I mean, all of the Southern Jews were minorities in either smaller or larger towns, but small minorities.
Very, very small minorities.
Right. So an agreement was reached by the national organizations with their Southern constituency that the Southerners would be consulted and informed before any such steps were taken in the future. It's a legitimate agreement, and I think it still exists to this day. Certainly it does in the Anti-Defamation League, that if the national organization is going to take a position with an amicus brief on a local issue in the United States Supreme Court, it won't do so without consulting the local leadership. And of course, consulting doesn't mean that the local leadership has a veto, just that their opinions and their arguments will be heard. So that remains the policy. When I was working on the Jaycee matter, in view of this incipient revolt that I just referred to, the National Office of the American Jewish Committee sent out Dr. A. Hill Feinberg. Dr. Feinberg, who was a rabbi, had a great many years' experience in Jewish community relations. In fact, I think he wrote a book on the Rosenwald trial, dealing with the anti-Semitic components of that issue. At any rate, he even attended a luncheon of the Jaycees with me to get a kind of feel of the organization. The national office decided, or let me know, that in terms of my involvement on school desegregation, I was on my own. That they would not support me if my involvement became an embarrassment to the Jewish communities in the South. I felt like I had enough support from important Atlanta leaders of the HAC to where I could afford to go ahead. People like Morris, Abram, DeJohn Franklin, and Phoebe, the Bunnins, Avery Olson, David Goldwasser, and Bill Schwartz of National Service Industries, Bud Weiss of Montagues, Joe Lawson, Davison's, now Macy's, and others. The local leadership felt that we needed to make a contribution, and I felt that we needed to make a contribution to what was the overriding human relations issue of our time.
But Richards involved at that point?
Not in AJC leadership. Richards was, of course, became very involved in the whole process, but I didn't consider them part of my leadership. At any rate, I decided, okay, I'm on my own, but I've got important local support, and I can do what's necessary, provided I kept the low profile. And that meant no publicity at all for any of my activities in the desegregation process. The last thing I wanted was for my leadership to open up their morning paper and read about me on the front page. That would have been a disaster for us, and probably would have been the end of my career team at reduced committee. But be that as it may, that became my modus operandi. That everything I did had to be done without publicity.
And that pretty much carried throughout your group?
And that pretty much carries throughout my career. Even though Southern Jews do not feel as vulnerable today as they did in the 1950s. They're a much more self-confident community today. And they're open in their advocacy of a number of issues. They still have some aversion to publicity, particularly the older Jews. At any rate, that's one of the reasons why, and that's the reason why, family and friends often didn't know how I was doing, because I couldn't talk about it.
Well, school word desegregate, and your role in that process was significant. What you recall some of the meetings that you had that were kind of pivotal?
No, I think that the next meeting that was pivotal took place during the 1960 presidential campaign, where Dr. King and others had been arrested at Riches for trying to integrate the eating facilities at Riches. And Dr. King was thrown into prison in Breedsville, which was used for the hardcore criminals in Georgia. Now, the reason for that was that Dr. King had previously been arrested for failure to have a Georgia driver's license. He had been living in Montgomery, he'd had an Alabama driver's license, and he moved back to Atlanta, and he hadn't taken the time to get a Georgia driver's license. And Georgia requires, 30, 60, 90 days, something like that, in which new residents of Georgia have to get a Georgia driver's license. So he had previously been stopped and sentenced, put on probation for not having a Georgia driver's license. So when he was arrested at Riches on the trespass charge, sitting in, he had violated his probation, and he was called before Judge Oscar Mitchell here in DeKalb County. And Oscar Mitchell revoked his probation and said he had to serve this sentence, which was 1 year. which is a tough sentence.
But the max of superior prison.
Yeah. At any rate, one day I went up to Morris Abrams' office at the law firm to discuss some American Jewish Committee business with him. And Morris said to me, in a few minutes, Daddy King, that's Martin's father, was called Daddy King. Daddy King and Don Howell, who was a very prominent African-American attorney here, Marge said those Daddy King and Don Howell were coming up to see me to talk about Martin's case. And before we talked about any AJC business, would I be good enough to go into the library and see if I could find anything that could help get Martin out of jail? And so I went back to the library, and really only took me a few minutes. I looked up the statute under which he had been sentenced, and the statute provided for a maximum penalty of 6 months for this violations. And Judge Mitchell had sentenced him to a year. Well, clearly that sentence was invalid and excessive. And that became the grounds on which ultimately Martin's sentence was overturned, and he didn't have to serve it. In the meantime, because they had hardcore criminals at Leedsville, we were concerned, all of us were concerned, that Martin King might get badly beaten or killed, either by fellow prisoners or by the guards.
Yeah, how long was he at surveyor?
I don't remember how long he was there. He was there. I just don't remember. But it was a matter of considerable concern. If I'm Woki and Lex in Reedsville with the crowd that was down there. And Bobby Kennedy, as I recall, called Koresh.Kin to express his concern and assure her that he would do everything he could to try to get Martin out of jail. And that telephone call was widely publicized and became very important in mobilizing black voters for John Kennedy in the 1960 presidential election against Richard Nixon. As late as 1960, there were still a lot of African-American voters who were voting Republican because they identified the Republican Party as the party of Lincoln.
Well, very killed divided.
And in Atlanta, the leading black newspaper was the Republican newspaper. Now, I think in northern states, most of the blacks had started voting Democratic during the New Deal. But around here, and in many other places as well, there was still a strong residue of black loyalty to the Republican Party because of the great emancipator.
And there was a larger black middle class.
And yeah, right. In any event, I felt like in helping to providing the basis for getting Martin out of Reedsville Penitentiary, I felt like at the time I was making a significant contribution because I didn't know what would happen to him.
Or if he ever knew he'd done that.
Oh, I'm sure he never did. And I don't even think Don Hallowell, with whom I worked later on the Atlanta Charter Commission, ever knew it. I mean, I don't think anybody ever knew it except Morris and me.
Very, very important.
I think it may have. Although, if they had let Martin be killed in jail, it would have been a holy hell all over the country. At any rate, of course, the next area that I got involved in was public accommodations, and that leads to public but what Martin was doing when he was arrested at Riches was protesting segregation in eating place, an eating establishment.
So, still taking a low profile, you got involved in problems of public accommodation, which I guess came to a head after 64, right?
During 64, yes, right. At that time, the chairman the Atlanta chapter of the American Jewish Committee was Cecil Vandiver, one of the dream architects in Atlanta. And he's an outstanding guy. In fact, he's one of my heroes. This was a guy,
Very widely respected.
this is a guy who put his money where his mouth is. I mean, who really stood up for his principles, even when it cost him commissions or money. At any rate, Cecil had been an active supporter of Ivan Allan when Ivan Allan was elected mayor against West Maddox. And after Ivan became mayor, Ivan appointed Cecil as co-chairman of the Mayor's Committee on Community Relations. The other co-chairman was a boy named Bob Wood. Might have been Woods, I'm not sure, who was the attorney for Sears in Atlanta. So as integration of public accommodations became imminent, Cecil said to me, prepare a plan for the city of Atlanta as to how we can comply in an orderly fashion with what we anticipate Congress is going to pass, and which of course Congress did pass. Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title IV of that Civil Rights Act mandated the end of segregation in places of public accommodation, such as restaurants and hotels and similar establishments. And so I sat down and wrote out a plan of action. And Cecil and Bob Wood called a meeting at Cecil's home on Mount Barron Road, to which light leadership was invited. Those were people who were leaders in the hotel and restaurant business in Atlanta, as well as some public officials, like Sam Russell, the vice mayor, and Chief Herbert Jenkins, the chief of police. And there were some other people there, like my friend Don McAvoy of the National Conference of Christians and Jews, and a few others. And basically, that leadership group adopted my plan of action. Now, the next step was to take the plan of action to Dr. Coffin, who was a black sociologist in the Emory University conference. The black leadership had pretty much designated Dr. Coffin, a sociologist, as I say, to help them work out their approach into public accommodations. So Dr. Kaufman and I sat down and we went over my proposal, my draft, which had been approved by the white leadership. And he made virtue changes in it with a few minor suggestions. He then took it back to his leadership. The upshot of that was a meeting at the Butler Street YMCA, which is, is a black YMCA, because in those days, the only kind of YMCAs we had were black African-American ones and white ones.
It was one of the few places where blacks and whites could get together.
But they could get together at NYW and YMCAs. But basically they were segregated facilities. So this meeting was held at the Butler Street Y. And it was basically a meeting of black leadership to hear the plan. And Bob Wood and Cecil Alexander outlined what we proposed. And basically what we proposed was that we had to have the first couple of days of the desegregation go smoothly, and there be a general perception of the community that it was progressing and it was going smoothly and without violence. Bear in mind that the segregationist politicians had warned that blood is going to run in the streets if you try this. If you desegregate schools, if you desegregate the places of public accommodations, I mean, it's going to be a bloody mess around here. And it's going to be violence which we won't be able to control. So we had to establish not only that it was working, but that it was working and without violence. So as part of this agreement, the blacks agreed to avoid testing the hardcore segregationist institutions. That is like Lester Maddox's restaurant, the Pigrig restaurant. So don't go to Lester Maddox's place the first few days, because then the next day's headlines in the newspaper will be resistance to desegregation, whereas we wanted the next day's headline in the newspaper to be compliance with desegregation. The blacks basically accepted the plan, which I had drafted. And sitting in the back of the room in the Butler Street Y, I felt like a playwright, because these guys were reading my lines. You know, I had written the script, and they were reciting it.
Most of it was very fair.
I was proud. I was. I admit it. Then Daddy King got up and said, where else but in Atlanta would the white leadership offer to do what the black leadership wanted them to do before we even asked? Well, at this point, the euphoria was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Daddy King was followed at the podium by Mayor Ivan Allan. And Ivan Allan, in I guess one of his rare public gas, said, Dr. King, he said, do you remember that when I went up to Washington to testify in favor of this public accommodation statute, that you warned me not to do it? Well, of course, that completely embarrassed Daddy King in front of his fellow black leaders. And Ivan turned to kind of peed red and realized that he had unnecessarily embarrassed Daddy King, and I think regretted what he said, but of course it was only heard by a comparatively small group of people.
I remember meeting Daddy King. He was a very formidable person. I think he rebounded pretty quickly.
He was not only a formidable person, but he was an outstanding orator.
Yeah.
I mean, Martin came by his oratorical abilities naturally from his father. I remember, by the way, going to a funeral conducted by Daddy King, the first time I'd ever been to the funeral of an African American in Atlanta or anywhere else. And Daddy King was doing the eulogy. And I felt this urge to laugh. And it was mortifying. You know, it was psychotic to start laughing at the funeral. Then behind me, I heard people start to titter and then to burst out laughing. And I realized that what Daddy King was doing, he was relieving attention by trying to make the congregation laugh. And he would turn the congregation on and off, up and down. He would make them cry, then he would make them laugh, and make them cry again. And it was a talent that I was in awe of. I mean, he was a great speaker, and he knew how to manipulate an audience.
I think I'm going to have to check the tape to see just where we are. I had more time we had, so let's just take a short break here.
Okay.
So it looks like we're going to have enough tape for it to continue for quite a while, at least 30 more minutes. I neglected to ask you about your trip to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. You mentioned that the last time we were there.
Yes, I went down to Tuscaloosa for the grand opening of the University of Alabama.
And when was that?
I'm trying to think, and I can't remember what year it was.
So in the late early 60s? Late
Yeah, I would guess it was in the late 60s.
late 60s.
No, it was probably the middle 60s. I'll start in the middle 60s. I organized a little committee of three people. Will Campbell, who represented the National Council of Churches, Henry Cabrak, who represented the Catholic Interracial Conference, and myself. And we went down to Tuscaloosa with the idea that if the administration, being the Kennedy administration, if the administration faltered in its determination to push for the admission of the African American students to the University of Alabama, and we would be on the scene, and we would be prepared to make a statement to exert whatever moral influence representatives of the three major religious groups in the United States could exercise. Now, it turned out it wasn't necessary, but
I remember getting down to Tuscaloosa. I had a reservation that I guess was called the Tuscaloosa Inn, the only large, substantial hotel in Tuscaloosa at that time. And I came into the hotel, and who was sitting in the lobby but Bobby Sheldon, the imperial wizard of the United Clans of America. And he was kind of holding court. And I was flabbergasted. I mean, here's a damn Klan leader, and they're fawning all over him.
Bow.
I was disgusted, frankly. But Bobby Sheldon was clearly a big man in Tuscaloosa. At any rate, when Will Campbell, who was based in Nashville, got down to Tuscaloosa, he had neglected to make a hotel reservation for himself. So I said, Will, I've got 2 beds in my room. You can bunk with me tonight. I don't want you to be able to say there was no room at the inn for Will Campbell. Will Campbell came down with his guitar, and that night he opened up his guitar, and I brought in a large bottle of bourbon whiskey, and most of the visiting friends congregated in my room. Representatives of the major weekly news magazines, Time, Newsweek, U.S. News, New York Times, the L.A. Times, the Atlanta newspapers. And Will entertained us with
Because they had the only wet room in the hotel?
he entertained us praying and singing, and I provided the liquid refreshment with the bourbon. As a matter of fact, it was kind of my modus operandi in desegregation situations, is find out where Claude Satan of the New York Times was, and go to his room or his walk, wherever he was, and bring in a bottle of bourbon, and that was my ticket of admission. And sit there for 3 hours, because everybody came through Claude Sitman's room. And if you sat there for 3 hours, you could pretty much find out what was going on in the community. And of course, I had a little self-intrigue myself, because I had, in most communities, I had sources as well, some of my constituents in the community. So I was welcome both for my sources as well as for my bourbon. And I found that it was a useful approach. To a useful approach to covering desegregation crises. And I did it in Tuscaloosa, I did it in Birmingham, and a few other places as well. At any rate, the next morning, Nicholas DeB. Katzenbach, who was the Deputy Attorney General, faced off with George Wallace, and I was only a really short distance behind Katzenbach. I had gotten press credentials. My friend Norman Podhorst, the end of Commentary Magazine, had sent me a telegram, a wire, asking me to copy it for Commentary Magazine. So I had a press credential.
and I was standing only a short distance behind.
What, like one or two people behind?
I would say about 15 feet behind, about 15 feet behind. And I had a very good view of Captain Back, and Captain Back was facing George Wallace, and George Wallace was facing out toward us. And I thought George Wallace was in an almost catatonic state. I mean, he was so stiff, so rigid. And I saw a trembling sound when he confronted General Katzenbach. And anyway, of course, Wallace refused to admit the students in the morning. And everybody withdrew. And during the lunch period, during the lunch break, by arrangement, I'm sure, the President of the United States, with the advice of the Attorney General, federalized the Alabama National Guard. Now, the Alabama National Guard had been arrayed behind the governor of Alabama with their rifles pointing out toward the Justice Department people. But once the president federalized the National Guard, he turned them around so that they were facing the other direction.
Was Wallace still there?
Wallace was still there.
I showed late in trouble.
Of course, Wallace also had his state troopers there. But he realized he couldn't use the state troopers against the Alabama National Guard. So that's how the Kennedy administration trumped the Wallace administration. By using the Alabama National Guard to force the opening of the University of Alabama. Now, once the Kennedy administration made that move, and once the governor of Alabama backed off, then there was, of course, no need for Will Campbell and Henry Campbell-Ack, and I like to say these things, because the president had done as much as you could have expected him to do, and he had succeeded in opening up the university. That was...
So did many people think that he would go that far at that time?
Well, I think most people were surprised that with the president's gamut of federalizing the Alabama National Guard, it was clearly the way to go. It was clearly the right move to make, because it's the one thing that could not only force but allow George Wallace to withdraw racially and said, well, I can't fight the Alabama National Guard. Nobody expected to do that. And George Wallace had pledged segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And they had to give him kind of a face-saving exit too.
Well, after Eisenhower at the Little Rock? No, I wonder.
But you see, Eisenhower brought in federal troops.
Yeah.
He didn't use the Office for National Guard. He brought in federal troops. He brought in one of the airborne paratroop.
82nd?
Imagine the 82nd, I don't remember which one it was.
That's right. There was that distance. But I felt that maybe Kennedy felt a little bit of pressure having that precedent, but it was a different precedent.
Yes. And of course, Kennedy's move was a lot more successful than Eisenhower's. Yeah. I mean, the school year in Little Rock was a disaster. Yeah. I mean, it got the black kids in, but boy, they caught holy hell when they were in there.
Yeah. And of course, it was at a different level too. The parents were much more involved. Well, what about our voting rights? We were talking so kind of about involvement in the voting rights campaign.
Well, I didn't have really direct involvement in promoting voting rights. John Lewis and SMIC and Martin Luther King and SCLC and the NAACP were the cutting edge of social change on that issue as they were on the other issues that we've talked about. School desegregation, public accommodations, desegregation. And generally speaking, I felt like my role was to be a catalytic agent in the process of social change, that we could do our best work by working with white folks
trying to get white folks to accept the rapid changes that were taking place in the South, and to accept those changes in an orderly fashion, without rioting, without violence, and eventually in a good spirit.
I guess most people expected a lot of violence because it had occurred in Lockout Place.
Well, I think that certainly I and many of my friends underestimated the capacity of Southerners to adjust to the rapid pace of social change. The Southerners performed much better than we thought they would.
There were fewer real bigots.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there was some violence from Klansmen and people with a Klan mentality, but on the whole, Southerners were law-abiding people, and they did what they needed to do to adopt to the changing order of things. Now, I did go down to Montgomery, Alabama, when the march from Selma to Montgomery was reaching Montgomery after they had tried to register in Selma, and they had been beaten back by Sheriff Clark at the Pass Bridge, and then Lyndon Johnson, by this time the President of the United States. Lyndon Johnson protected a group of civil rights marchers who marched from Selma to Montgomery to protest the denial of voting rights. And I went down to Montgomery. So kind of that story about Selma.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, my boss in New York, my supervisor in New York, had said, Charles, we'd like you to go down to Selma.
Yeah.
And I said, listen, I said, I would like to think that I can do more for the movement by using my head than having it bashed in.
We wanted to keep your priorities in order.
Yes, but if you think you could do more for the movement by having yours bashed in, you go to Selma. And by way of explanation, I should say that a Unitarian minister had just had his head bashed in Selma, and he subsequently died from the beating.
When was it the original?
That was the same week as the march to Montgomery. And the Viola Liuzzo was murdered by a group of Klansmen, and she had come down from Detroit to support the voting rights effort.
You know, there was quite a lot of violence, and not just assault and battery with it, murder.
Yes,
the three gun Queen Miners or
it was at Mississippi.
that was in Mississippi.
Mississippi.
But it was the South in general.
Right. Viola Liuzzo, who was murdered in Alabama, and the Reb Zeed, who was murdered in Alabama, were both, I should say, white supporters of civil rights.
Mm-hmm. And I've forgotten the timing of the Mississippi, the thieves who were killed there. Then what?
I'm not sure, but I think it was summer of '64. It could have been '65.
Okay, it was all them that same couple of years or so. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
At any rate, I was down in Montgomery, and Eleanor has relatives in Montgomery. Among the very few white liberals in Montgomery, where Eleanor's relatives. The day of the demonstration before the state capitol was a very hot day. I also had press credentials for that, and at the end of the day, I was very hot and very tired, and I went to sleep very early. And after I had been asleep for about an hour, one of Elder's relatives, a cousin of Tom Hines, called me on the phone and said, Charles, a friend of mine is here. She's connected with Emory University.
and can you give her a ride back to Atlanta tomorrow? And I said, sure, just have her be at my hotel at 9 o'clock in the morning and we'll drive back. I'll give her a lift. And she came to my hotel and we left in the morning. And as shortly after we were driving back to Atlanta, it came out in the conversation that she had visited Communist China. And I said to her, when did you visit Communist China? And she gave me a date that was during the Korean War. Well, I suddenly realized that no Americans were welcome in Communist China during the Korean War unless they were hardcore communists. And I realized that the woman sitting next to me in the front seat here was pretty much bound to be a communist. And it made me pretty nervous because I knew if I got stopped by the Alabama State Patrol, or even after we got back into Georgia, the Georgia State Patrol, this would be real trouble. And I never drove so carefully in my life, observing every speed limit and every stop sign and every traffic light to avoid being pulled over. Finally, we got back to Atlanta without incident. And I would have walked.
It was also fortunate, I guess, I believe I remember you were saying that she was white.
Yes, she was white. She was a white woman. But as I say, I had one nervous drive because the last thing I needed was to be arrested with a communist in the car and the headline the next morning. You know, that would have killed me too. If the police hadn't beaten me up, let's talk a little bit about hospital desegregation.
Okay, yeah. First, you were just about to say something about the hospital desegregation. You want to continue with that now?
Yes. In 1967, I think it was, the Medicare law came into effect. And the Medicare law required that for a hospital to participate in Medicare payments, it had to be certified as in compliance with the Civil Rights Act as 1964. Now, certified, all the hospitals in the United States into an enormous task. And the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare didn't have the staff to do that. So they hired on a bunch of consultants for an 90-day period. In Atlanta, because there were a lot of civil rights professionals here, the consultant group consisted of people who had experience in civil rights, like people from NAACP, Urban League, Anti-Defamation League, American Jewish Committee, National Conference of Christians and Jews, Georgia Council on Human Relations and Real Pool Resources. Yes, right. In other places, I think they drafted some Social Security bureaucrats and others who had very real experiences with desegregation issues. At any rate, the first inspection that I was assigned to was an inspection of a very nice little hospital in northwest Georgia, which I think was in Penn, Georgia. I could be wrong about that, but I think that could have worked. It was built with, as most of these county hospitals were, it was built with Cliff Lutton funds, so the federally financed hospital, Cliff Lutton. And I remember going up there and taking a tour of the hospital with the hospital administrator. And he walked me through it. And when we got to the end of the tour, I said to him that I hadn't noticed that any of the semi-final rooms or wards had both black and white patients in. And he said, well, I would rather die than put a white patient in a room with a black patient. And I said, well, what's to pay my job? Very simple. Obviously, you can't be certified as a compliant to Civil Rights Act. And when you change that policy, you're not going to be. And that was that. I also recall doing certification issues with Georgia Baptist Hospital.
Right there, wrong.
Correct. And I met with the administrator there, and I raised a question that's, I remember there were any white, that they black to me, or African American nurses on the staff of Georgia Baptist. He said, no, they were. I said, well, you know, you're not going to get certified if you have a living white staff. And he said, okay, we'll take Dr. Yancey. We'll put him on the waiting list. We'll put Dr. A.C. Yancey on the waiting list. And this is in the late 60s, 1967. We'll put him on the waiting list to staff too. Now, I found out later talking to some of my civil rights colleagues that each of the major hospitals in Georgia, in Atlanta, North Side, Emory, Piedmont, Georgia Baptist, they had all said, okay, we'll take Dr. Yancey. And we would have to cut out Dr. Yancey into little pieces in order to have met those requests. And anyway, told them that wasn't acceptable. You could, after telling the blacks of issues, no need to apply here. You couldn't then put them at the back of the waiting list. I mean, they had to come right up to the immediately certification for staff police. Then back to the subject of the nursing staff. The Georgia Baptist had the nursing school right next to the hospital on Boulevard Rock. Not Boulevard, but Boulevard. And I said, are there any African Americans in the nursing school? And he said, no, there aren't. This is dearest students, Murray cycle. Right. And I said, do you recruit to the nursing school? And they said, yeah, we go from Keister. And I said, well, about how far do you go to recruit? And he said, well, we go about as far as Gainesville, Northeast, and about as far as LaGrange in the Southwest. Then each about 70 miles from Atlanta. And I said, well, do you recruit at David P. Howard High School, which is around Corky here? And he said, no, we don't. I said, well, will you agree to recruit at David P. Howard High School? He said, no, I won't. Now, David P. Howard High School, which is subsequently been closed, was an all-black school. And that's why he didn't want, obviously, why he didn't want to recruit there. And I said, well, you know, if we're on the Dutch policy, you can't be certified. And he said, well, you know, we've gotten along pretty well without Medicare money so far, and I think we can continue to do it. We're hospital run nearly full all the time. So it says it's not as if we will really leave your business. But we don't. I said, okay, you know, that's your decision as to whether you want to comply or not. But I can you take patients, a lot of patients from who are retired Baptist pastors, be it in their staff. Yeah, we do. And I said, well, you may have a little difficulty explaining to these Georgia Baptist pastors that their Medicare coverage is no good here at this hospital. And I said, of course, you will have a general public relations problem in explaining to the community why you're not going to be taking Medicare patients. But, you know, it's up to you. Well, I assumed he went back to his board, and they had some fairly intense discussion, and very shortly thereafter they decided that they would do what was necessary to come into compliance. I mean, I think they just didn't want to take the flat at that point. And there'll likely be more flack if they didn't comply than if they did. And obviously, segregationists would complain if they started to integrate the hospitals. But actually, in reality, that went very smoothly too. Now, nobody complained about having black nurses. Black women had been nursing white folks in the South for years. You know, and Ray took that wasn't the problem. Now, the next, the other major hospital that I got involved was St. Joseph, also here, also pretty well interact. And I had gotten a call from the regional director of HEW, called me one morning and said, Todd, I got a real problem with Archbishop Herman, the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Atlanta Diocese, Archdiocese. He said, Archbishop Herman is threatening to go to Washington and complain that we are prejudiced against Catholics, and that's why we're withholding the certification of their hospital. Did you know him? I knew him, yes. And of course I knew Archbishop Herman. I had worked with Archbishop Herman on a number of different issues, and found him exceedingly collaborative and sensitive. I didn't think he had a racial problem at bottom. And he was certainly very good on Jewish issues, on issue politics, anti-Semitism in Catholic Egypt and so forth. At any rate, he said, our communication, the HEW director said, our communication is virtually broken down. We can't talk to each other. And he said, you can help. I said, yeah, I'll try. You know, I'll give the Archbishop a call and see what I can do. So I called the Archbishop at 10 o'clock in the morning. And by 11 o'clock, I had arranged for a meeting to take place that afternoon at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 p.m. With the HEW people, the Archbishop, and the sister who was the administrator of the hospital, and myself. And we sat down together that afternoon and went over what were the obstacles to certification in with respect to choice St. Jordan conferred. And it turned out that the obstacles to certification were minor. And it struck me that the contrast between St. Joseph and Georgia Baptist was stark, because Georgia Baptist had dug at its heels and was saying, hell no, we won't go. And St. Joseph had voluntarily eliminated almost all of the old traditional practices that were based on racial distinctions among patients and staff at the hospital. And I said, look, these people have moved the ball to the 5-yard line without any push from the federal government. And just a few things here that need to be done. And I then turned to the Catholic and said, well, now, could you do this and that? And the third thing, I said, yeah, it's not a problem. The issue was resolved. And it was just a breakout of communication and a misunderstanding. I think because the feds probably didn't understand the mentality, the psyche of the Catholic Church, as opposed to the Southerners that had been dealing with, who had a stake in segregation, and the Catholic Church was opposed to it.
We're doing this from Washington.
Washington from here. I don't know. I mean, you know, I don't. The difficulty in negotiating that they didn't understand in negotiating with the archdiocese that they were negotiating with people who were trying to act in good faith for compliance, as opposed to both of the other hospitals, where there was no good faith and no desire to comply.
But the atmosphere creates chips on shoulders.
Exactly. I also want to tell you about hospital in San Antonio, which I didn't personally expect, but whose paperwork I was reviewing Monday, 7 days during this period I spent in the office, reviewing inspections that had been done by others elsewhere. and a Ken course inspection in this hospital in San Antonio. And at this hospital, they required that Hispanic patients wear yellow armbands. I had a fit. I mean, I nearly went to the ceiling because, of course, in Nazi Germany, Jews were required to wear yellow armbands. And I figured this dirate started to turn up. There's no way I could let this go by. They claimed that the reason for the yellow armbands was that it helped the hospital staff to know whether it would dress a patient in Spanish or English. Although it wouldn't take long to find out if you would dress somebody in English and they responded in Spanish, that they need to be communicated with in Spanish. In any event, I put down, that their certification had to be denied, but I assume that fact stopped.
Sure, but the desegregation really happened very quickly after that, didn't it?
Yes.
When I came to 71, and I saw real evidence of like all of that, everything. My travels in the master
Using all the push paper. And you put up on the paper.
Well, it did not because it was our purse, as well as public relations consideration.
No, I would have stopped this a minute and turned that heater off. Our ears adjust to that quicker than the thicker portable. Okay, now we're taking away that distracting noise. I hope it's not too distracting. And we were going to talk about your work with Agnes College that occurred after the hospital desegregation.
Yes. We're going against Agnes College. It turned out that there was a graduate student at Emory in the English department named Kay Harris.
Oh, I met her. She was teaching at Morehouse when I arrived in Southern Utah.
She was a lovely young lady. Her husband was David Harris, a attorney at whom I knew, and she was certified with a recommendation from the Emory graduate English department for a teaching position at Agnes College. And she went through the paperwork and the interview. She was virtually hired. At the end of the interview, the interviewer said, well, by the way, what church do you belong to? And Miss Harris said, I don't belong to a church. I'm Jewish. Well, Kay Harris had married a Jewish man and converted to Judaism. She was not Jewish by birth. As a matter of fact, she was from an old American family, a descendant, I think, of Francis Scott Key, the author of the Star Spangled Banner. So they didn't think she would. She didn't, quote, look Jewish, unquote. She didn't fit the stereotype. At any rate, she then came to me and we talked about it. And we then went to Agnes College and said, this is wrong. And they said, well, we're sorry about that, but this is a Christian institution. It's a Christian college. And one of the things that being a Christian college means is that we hire Christians to the faculty. You had a long discussion with the president of the college in which we pointed out that there were a lot of Christian colleges that had Jewish faculty all over the country. And there's even Brandeis, which is Jewish, which had Christian faculty, and the Christian institutions, Protestant and Catholic, that had Jewish faculty, because Emory itself, the Methodist institution, it has always had Jewish faculty, always reminded me. And we went back and forth with Agnes, tried to keep it quiet without trying to embarrass them. but trying to let them work through the problem, talk it out among themselves, and change their policy. Nothing doing. They dug in and wouldn't yield, and that included overtures that were made personally to some members of the Board of Trustees who were active in the general Atlantic business community, Atlantic business and civic relationships with prominent Jews in the city. I remember one of the trustees that one of the leaders of the American Jewish Committee talked to was Allan, who I guess at this point may have been former mayor. No, Drummond was still the mayor, but I think he was a trustee of Agnes. A lot of the Atlanta establishment had connections with that person. I Presbyterian was Presbyterian cool, yeah, and we were getting nowhere with them. But we gave them plenty of time, and we gave them several years before we started arm twisting. Finally, they changed the policy. The factor that made the policy change was the Emory University faculty. You know, Emory and Agnes Scott has an arrangement under which Agnes Scott students can take courses at Emory, and Emory students can take courses at Agnes Scott. And finally, the Emory faculty said, we're going to cut off this arrangement. Because if you, Agnes Scott, send your students over here to Emory, God forbid, they might be taught by a Jewish faculty member. And you wouldn't want that to happen, now would you? And when the Emory faculty laid down that kind of a condition, that, you know, we're not going to take Agnes Scott students over here because
Might be contaminated.
they might be contaminated, yes. That's when Agnes Scott finally understood that that was more eat than they can take, and they changed their policy.
The business interests didn't influence him at all.
The business influence didn't move the college. It was characteristic of the business leadership of Atlanta that it moved when it had to move, but not before.
Yeah.
In other words, when the pressure reached a certain point, the business interests would intervene and make change. But if the pressure was low-grade pressure, it wasn't going to give in.
I'm reminded now of the reluctance to give Martin Luther King Jr. a dinner after the Seed and Liberal Peace Prize. That must have been a turning point.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was an interesting episode in Atlanta's racial history. I think it was Dr. Mays, Archbishop Halleman, and Rabbi Jacob Borchardt, my Rabbi at Temple, who organized this dinner with Ivan Allen's cooperation. For Dr. King, when he came back from receiving the Nobel Prize, and my friend Don McAvoy at the National Conference of Christian Jews, he and his office were serving as a secretariat for this dinner, handling the ticket sales. And initially, ticket sales were going poorly. And the way McAvoy relates to me was, it reached a point at which Robert Woodruff says the Coca-Cola Company said to the business leaders in Atlanta, we make our headquarters here in Atlanta. We're an international company. We don't have to make our headquarters in Atlanta. We could make our headquarters almost anywhere else. And we will not continue to make our headquarters in Atlanta if Atlanta embarrasses us. We do not want to be embarrassed by Atlanta. Because we sell all over the world to people
different bases, coaching relating to social. At that point, the banks, for example, that had asked for 2 tickets, one a table or 2 tables, and the dinner was a great success. And I was very pleased about it. One footnote to the dinner.
We went to the dinner, of course, and there was a program. And on the back of the program was a list of sponsors. And my curiosity did what it was. I went down the list of sponsors to see how many of them are Jewish. 20% of the sponsors elected were Jewish, in a community where 1% of the Jews were Jewish.
1% of the population.
Yeah. And I was very pleased about that. And of course it reflected the fact that the civil rights movement had rather more sympathy and support in the Jewish community than it in the community as a whole. There was one occasion when I was flying back to Atlanta, I think from a meeting in Washington, and I found myself on a flight with Andy, and I remember sitting together, and Andy said to me, we couldn't have done what we've done without the financial support we had from the Jewish community. It was very substantial. It was very substantial. Now, when was this? I'm not sure. I guess it was about 1970, somewhere around there.
Are you, weren't you instrumental in Andy M. visiting Israel one time?
Oh, yes. I guess this was about 1966. The American Jewish Committee got a grant to send 10 outstanding young African-American leaders on a trip to Israel. And out of the 10, I got to pick 2. My 2 were Ed B. Young and Vernon George.
Was this from the whole country thing?
From the whole country fan. And my 2 were Andy Young and Vernon George. And I thought, and it turns out with 2 very good selections.
Yeah, you could.
At that point, because Andy Young was already, I think, moderately well known, but Vernon Jordan was an unknown.
Yeah. He's certainly well known today.
Let me come back to the Agnes Scott thing for just a minute, because it affected my relationship with the American Jewish Committee and how I felt about working with them, and they with me, I think. After the issue had been settled, my supervisor in New York said to me, "Charles, I'm more interested in the process you went through than in the result." And I was flabbergasted. That I thought this was trying to eliminate discrimination against Jewish academics, Jews and all walks of life, but in this case, Jews who were in the academic field, and opened up new opportunities so they could get teaching jobs. The American Jewish Committee at that time was dominated by social workers. And one of the distinctions between the American Jewish Committee and the Anti-Defamation League is the staff of the Anti-Defamation League were dominated by lawyers. And the process orientation of the social workers put me off, to tell you the truth. I was interested in results. There was a problem, I wanted to solve it. And there was discrimination against Jews, I wanted to overcome it.
And you do whatever you have to do that.
Within bounds, of course. And I realized that I wasn't comfortable with these people, and they weren't entirely comfortable with me.
So you left them.
We finally decided I could reach with the part company. And that's when I took the job as executive director of the Atlanta Charter Commission. The Georgia legislature had just passed a statute establishing a charter commission for the city of Atlanta. City of Atlanta hadn't had a new charter in 100 years. And you can imagine it was pretty much out of date. The charter commission bill was guarded through the General Assembly by Representative Grace Herman, who was the first, I think, African-American woman in the Georgia General Assembly.
Was she the one that appointed you as executive director?
Well, she wanted me as executive director. Sam Marcel, who was the vice mayor at the time, also wanted me as executive director. And I thought I was qualified because I had both legal experience and community relations experience. And the Charter Commission required, number one, the creation of a new legal document, and a document that was supported in the communities and could pass the next General Assembly. So it was a good spot for me because I could use both of my legal training and my community relations experience.
And you've been there for long enough time to really.
Oh, I knew the community by then, yes. I had been here almost 20 years. It was a very interesting experience. Basically, what Mrs. Hamilton saw was that we had a weak mayor form of government in Atlanta. Now, we had gotten wide of that because we had in William B. Hartsfield, and I'm now two men of extraordinary ability and leadership quality. And they were able, by virtue of their leadership ability, to get things done that the charter really didn't enable to do, to solve problems. For example, the weak mayor form of government, each of these departments in the municipal administration was responsible to a committee of the Board of Aldermen. The Parks Department would answer to the Parks Committee, the Police Department answered to the Police Committee, and so forth.
Nobody answered to the mayor.
And so the mayor didn't really have the executive authority that a strong executive actually needs. For example, when we had the problem in the late 60s with the influx of hippies in Atlanta, and the hippies were creating some problems in Piedmont Park. And the Parks Department said, this is a police problem. We're not going to handle that. The police department said, this is a parks problem. Well, you have to have somebody to bang some heads together. Now, as I say, Mayor Allan didn't have the authority to do it, but he did. Mrs. Hamilton and others in the community figured we better get a small mayor form of government before we elect a black mayor. In other words, once an African American is elected mayor of Atlanta, it'll be very difficult to get the Georgia General Assembly to invest the office of mayor of Atlanta with additional powers. So we better do it now while Ivan was still the mayor, because we could all see what was coming down the road, that it wasn't going to be very long before Atlanta elected an African American mayor. And indeed, after Sam Marcel, we have had a succession of African Americans as mayor, beginning with Lena Jackson. So this commission was formed. I want to, of course, the chairman of the commission was Emmett Vandiver, who was one of the outstanding lawyers in Atlanta. I don't know that there's a better word than at the other end. He was chairman. Grace Hamilton was vice chairman. And about a third of the commission were African Americans. One of the people who made a notable contribution in that effort was Professor Robert Grisbane of Morehouse College, the head of the political science department. He headed up our education committee. There were others who did very good work and who were very constructive. What pleased me particularly in the Charter Commission, we must have had hundreds and hundreds of votes. I mean, sometimes you would vote on a paragraph, sometimes you would vote on the sentence, sometimes you would vote on a word, you know. What word should go in here, or what sentence should go here. There wasn't a single vote in which the Charter Commission split on racial lines, in which all the whites were on one side and all the African Americans were on the other. And I thought we had created an atmosphere in that Charter Commission that enabled us to work very nicely.
Yeah. Well, like if they were like Brisbane and Hamilton, you had very good people work with.
The other thing, which was my contribution, I put in Bill of Rights to the Atlanta Charter Commission. The first city charter, I think, in the United States to have the Bill of Rights in it. Now, I don't think it made a lot of difference, to tell you the truth. As a burn that. I haven't heard much about it either. But we did put it in there.
I remember, I think must have been the first time I saw you. It had to be in 71 or 72. There was a meeting, not actually on the Morehouse campus, but across the street in the Newbury House or whatever, one of the religious houses there, explaining the Charter Commission work.
Well, that's one of the things, of course, I did, was I went around trying to line up support to the Charter by explaining what it is we were trying to do.
What was it finally completed?
I think it was 1971, 72.
I think this must have been at the very end.
Yeah, and it was adopted. It was adopted by the Georgia General Assembly.
Now we'd have strong mayors.
And the mayor, at least, if we don't have a strong mayor, at least he has the authority to do what needs to be done. In other words, we set it up. We set up the city of Atlanta government basically on the federal model, with three branches of government: an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And the mayor, as head of the executive branch, supervised and controlled all of the executive departments, so that if there was a dispute, for example, with the Park Department, the police department, the mayor had the authority, the legal authority, to settle it. Whereas before, he didn't.
There has been no lack of controversy, a conflict between the city council and the mayor. But the mayor does have a very strong hand.
You could write the best charter of the world, but in the final analysis, the city government is dependent upon the kind of officials that the people elect. If the people elect good people to public office, you'll have a good government. And if they don't, you won't, regardless of how good the charter is. You've got to have good people.
And those good people have to appoint good people.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. Yeah. And that hasn't always been the case.
Right.
That hasn't always been the case.
So you left the AJC and went to ADL? And
no, I left AJC and went to the Charter Commission, and then I went to ADL. Right. And at ADL, I became...
That's the Anti-Defamation League.
Yeah, but at the Anti-Defamation League, I became the Southern Civil Rights Director and the Southern Council. Now, that meant I had more of a lawyer's job than I had at the American Jewish Committee. I was doing more legal work, using my legal training more with the American Jewish Committee, with the Anti-Defamation League, rather.
Did you have more autonomy also?
Yes, I had more autonomy. I was, I guess you would say, the legal advisor and counsel to all of the ADL offices in the South. Richmond, Atlanta, Miami, Palm Beach, Tampa, New Orleans, Houston, Dallas. And I was the lawyer for those offices.
So the whole region.
For the whole region. And I dealt with the civil rights concerns within the whole South.
Mm-hmm.
And I was much more comfortable at ADL than I had been at the committee. And to say I was glad to have the opportunity to do some legal work that I didn't do at the committee. Now, at the ADL, my job entailed a lot more fact-finding than I had at the committee. By fact-finding, I mean developing information, collecting information on extremist groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, the Nazis, and Arabs. In that connection, that you mentioned, that there were a couple of occasions when information that came to me from informers actually saved some lives by preventing acts of terrorism. And I was very pleased to be able to do that. Georgia had, and still has, an anti-mask law, which was drafted by Morris Abram around 1950, and I think it was adopted in 1951. Introduced in the Georgia legislature by then representative from rural county named Osborne Williams, who represented Talmadge County. Osborne subsequently became a judge of the Fulton Spirit Court here in Atlanta. And the idea of the anti-mask law was to keep the Klan from going around with their faces covered, so that they could beat the hell out of people. And then the victim would be able to identify them. And so they could go unpunished. But it was also as a tactic of intimidation. And you know, you couldn't tell what was under the robe. You know, the guy might be carrying a baseball bat or a shotgun under his robe, or it might be your law, though he might be the boss. At any rate, the anti-mask law played a very significant role in reducing Klan activity in Georgia. Because the cowards were a lot more likely to get at and engage in their bigoted activities if nobody could see their faces and they couldn't be held accountable.
But I remember when I first came here in 71, soon after that there was one of the annual meetings in Stone Mountain with the fires and crosses, and people had masks. And I remember mentioning that to one of my colleagues at Morehouse, and he said, well, it can't be as against the law.
But the answer was they were on James Venables' private property, and you could wear a mask on private property with the consent of the owner. And James Venable was the head of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, I'm about social change. Now that's a part of this area that has very hostile ones.
Yes, yes, it had. At any rate, a group of Klansmen decided to challenge the anti-mask law of Georgia. And they notified the police that one of their members was going to show up in the courthouse square in Lawrenceville, masked and robed, at such and such a time, you know, such and such a day. And sure enough, he showed up and the police were waiting for him and they arrested him. And they hoped to have the Georgia war declared unconstitutional. He was represented in court by Michael Halpern, who was the immediate past chairman of the Georgia Civil Liberties Union, that is the Georgia branch of the American Civil Liberties Union. And I remember coming to court, and Michael Halpern was wearing a large sterling silver Star of David at the earring. I said, Michael, why are you wearing a Star of David earring? And he said, to irritate my clients. Well, in that trial, the state put me up as an expert witness on the Ku Klux Klan. And I testified that the robe and the hood was intimidating to blacks and Jews and other minorities. And it was intended, that was the purpose of it, and that was the effect of it. And I was on the stand for quite a while with Halpern cross-examining me. The trial wasn't carried locally on TV, but it was carried nationally by court TV on cable. And I remember getting a call from a friend of mine in California saying he had fallen asleep with the television set on, and suddenly he heard my voice. And he said, bolt upright, and there I was. At any rate, Herman and I had quite a colloquy, which was, people told me afterwards was the high point of the trial. I mean, he was trying to get me. He was saying, for example, you know, if you saw a parade and someone was wearing the Richard Nixon mask, you know, would that be illegal? I said, no, because nobody is intimidated anymore by Richard Nixon.
You know, the whole point of it was
The ACLU position was, this is symbolic speech. By wearing the mask and the hood, they're delivering a message. And we said, no, it's not just speech. It's a threat. And the case was then peeled. The man was convicted. The Klansman was convicted in Lawrenceville, and the case was appealed to the Georgia Supreme Court. And we filed a brief amicus curiae in the Georgia Supreme Court. It was written mostly by Dale Schwartz, through assistance from me. And I remember the morning it was argued in Georgia Supreme Court, I got into the elevator to go up to the top floor where the courtroom was. I got into the elevator and I turned around to face the door, and right behind me was Dave Holland and four of his fellow Klansmen. Dave Holland was out of the Klan, Georgia Klan. And he said, good morning, Mr. Wittenstein. And I thought to myself, am I going to reach the top floor in one piece, or they're going to beat the hell out of me in this elevator? I mean, it would just be quick 5 Klansmen with me in that elevator. I was very glad we got to the top floor. At any rate, we won the case. And Georgia still has an anti-mask law. Although in some states, the anti-mask law is knocked out. But number one, it probably wasn't as well drawn as our anti-mask law. And number two, it wasn't argued as well by the offside, and of course the state attorney general's office, as it was here.
The concept of terroristic threat is one that I've only heard about in recent years. I don't know about the history of law.
Yeah, well, you know, if a guy comes up to a teller at the bank and says, give me all the money in your cash drawer or I'll blow your head off. And you could say, well, you know, that's free speech. Not to me, it's not.
No.
That is not protected by the First Amendment. That's a threat, and there is a line there involving terroristic threats, where the First Amendment won't do you any good anymore, and I think that distinction gets lost sometimes in public debate.
Did one of the organizations in the South that I have a good deal of respect for is the our Southern Anti-Poverty Association. What is it? Southern
Anti-poverty law center.
Yeah,
Montgomery, Alabama.
Wilson, yeah, and Montgomery, and March D. Yeah. Did you work with them? Seems though you had some common interest.
Yes, we had some common interest. As a matter of fact,
Southern Poverty Law Center.
yes, Southern Poverty Law Center, when they were trying that case, which they were suing the Klansmen who lynched a black man in Mobile, Alabama, the UKA, United Klans of America. The ADL files contained the smoking gun. Or Morris Dees said this was the smoking gun, and we got it from the ADL files, and it was instructions about how to go about a lynching and how to tie a knot and all the minutiae of doing the lynching, which were followed by the UKA in this case. Now there was another occasion. Up in Marietta, there's a small television station, Channel 14, I think. But I think it may have moved on by now. But they were having a panel discussion on hate crimes by dissuasion. And I was on the panel, and Mark Dees was going to be on the panel, and my ACLU friend, who I just mentioned, Michael Haverman. At any rate, after the interview that was just with Morris Dees, the producer took a break, and I went up to Morris, and I said, Morris, you know that there's Dave Hollard and several of his Klansmen in the audience here today. I said, you couldn't see them because you were looking at the bright lights and shining in your face. He said, yeah, where? I kept right there. What all that? He said, these guys are threatening me. He said, I got a judgment against them, and I'm collecting money from trying to take their property to pay a judgment, and these guys are threatening me. And he was very upset that they were in the audience. Well, he disappeared into the back room with the producer, and a few weeks later, the producer comes out and says, the rest of the program has been canceled. Sorry, we have a technical malfunction, and we're not going to be able to finish the taping today. Then, everybody go home. So everybody left except me. And they had called the police. And when I finally left the building, there were 6 squad cars in the parking lot of the building. Morris was still inside. But they took that very seriously. Yeah. Because the claims would quit the head. And they still be after Morris Dees.
I'm sure they are. It amazed me that he has not been killed by now through work that he's done and publicity he's been getting. Right?
So it's surprising that they haven't happened. Yeah, well, I think his security now is a good deal better than it used to be. By the way, there's one aspect of racialization came up that I think is worth mentioning. The worst episode of anti-Semitism in the black community occurred in recent years, occurred after Andy Young was fired or quit as UN ambassador in the in the last year of the Carter administration. That would be, I guess, 1980. Carter's elected in 76, and this was the fourth year, very near the end of the year. A few days after he enlisted, and there was an uproar that the Jews had gotten Andy fired from black leaders all over the country because Andy had
That's right.
talked to the PLO.
Yeah, but
And it was the policy of the State Department at that time not to meet the PLO. I was invited to a luncheon at the top of what was then the First National Bank building. About a dozen people, almost all Jews, I think, Jews, who were longtime friendly supporters of Andy. And we met with him. I remember Stuart Rosenwald was there, Cecil Vandiver was there, and some others as well. And in the course of that meeting, I said to Andy, we're taking a lot of flack. We're getting clobbered. And we didn't do it. We're not responsible for your dismissal. And he said, no, you're not. In fact, Cyrus Vance was the key player. Cyrus Vance went to Jimmy Carter and said, this is insubordination. This guy had violated our instructions, and it's going to be him or me. And Andy Young said, I was planning on leaving the UN post anyhow, so that I could campaign for Jimmy's reelection. And I said to Jimmy, I'm going to go in a few months anyhow, so I can get back into partisan politics. I was on now. And they agreed that he would resign at that point. Now, Stuart Eidensback and Bob Lipschutz, who were two of the Jews who were leaders in the Carter administration, Bob Lipschutz was the counsel to the president, and Stuart Eidensback was the domestic affairs advisor. They asked Andy, please don't resign now. But Andy and Jimmy thought it would be well to do so. And then this anti-Semitic outburst about it, in which Jews were being scapegoated for something we hadn't done. And at that meeting, I said to Andy, look, we're getting clobbered. Why don't you sit down and write an op-ed piece for the New York Times on why you resigned, and make it clear that it wasn't pressure from the Jewish community. And I said, I'm sure the New York Times will publish whatever you write, or if they want the Atlantic Constitution, well, don't worry, it'll be published. And Andy said, well, I'm about to go up to Vermont for a couple of weeks of R&R, and I'll think about writing something while I'm up there. Nothing happened. A couple of months later, I was at some kind of black Jewish or black-white dialogue at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, Martin Luther King Jr.'s old church. And I remember Reverend Roberts, the pastor of Ebenezer, saying that the blacks had some grievances against the Jews. And one of the grievances he mentioned was that Jews had gotten Andy unfired as the American delegate to the United Nations. And I went up to Reverend Roberts after the program. I said, just didn't happen that way. And Reverend Roberts said to me, oh, I didn't know that. I said, of course he did. Nobody knows it because Andy hadn't said it and Jimmy Carter hadn't said it. When that firestorm erupted, Jimmy Carter was sailing down the Mississippi River on a paddle boat as part of his re-election campaign. So Jimmy said nothing, and Andy said nothing. And they let us take the heat. And I didn't appreciate that. And I still don't appreciate it. And I couldn't vote for Carter for his re-election in 1980 because he was a politician, ostensibly a man of great integrity, who was willing to let Jews be scapegoated and take the blame for something that he decided to do.
Yeah. Tell me about the Leo Frank case.
Well, one of the things I was embarrassed about in my years with the Anti-Defamation League is that we succeeded in getting a pardon for Leo Frank. When I say witty, I mean Dale Schwartz and I did most of the work on that pardon. The Nashville Tennessean, which is a Gannett newspaper, found Mr. Alonzo Mann up in northeast Tennessee. Mr. Mann had been Yale Frank's office boy, and he was now approaching death, really. He had a serious heart and lung problem, and he wanted to tell his story. He had worked for Leo Frank at the time of Mary Fagan's murder and was at the office at the factory the day that Mary Fagan was murdered. Now, this gave us an opportunity to go to the Pardon and Parole Board and say we had new information, new evidence. And what Mr. Mann's evidence was that he had gone off to the Confederate Memorial Day Parade and then come back to the factory. When he came back to the factory, there was Jim Connolly, the janitor, with the limp body of Mary Fagan over his shoulder on the first floor, the main floor, entering to the factory. And Connolly threatened him, say anything about this, and I'll get you or I'll kill you. I don't remember the exact language. But Alonzo Mann was about 12 years old at the time. And he went home and told his mother, and his mother told him to keep quiet about it. And then when Mr. Frank was accused of the murder, his mother said, don't worry about it. Joy will never convict Mr. Frank. Certainly not on the testimony of the black candidate. Now, the reason the testimony was crucial is that in the original trial, Jim Connolly had testified that Mr. Frank had him put Mary Fagan's body in the elevator on the second floor, which is where Mr. Frank's office was, and take the body down to the basement in the elevator, which he did. Now, this directly contradicts Connolly's testimony, because if he had taken the body from the second floor to the basement in the elevator, he couldn't have been seen carrying the body over his shoulder on the first floor. A couple of years later, the State Board of Pardons and Paroles, after refusing our initial request for a pardon granted, at that point I had made the oral argument before the board that resulted in the pardon because Dale Schwartz was unavoidably at a camera on another case. And he and I had done most of the work in getting the pardon for Leo Frank.
So this, in a way, capped off a very successful career, and I'm sure you...
Well, I don't know how successful, but it certainly capped it off.
No. I think we're